and get out and support your national team because they're going to be back in action in Vegas. They've made the Final Four of CONCACAF Nations League. John Herdman announced his roster on Wednesday morning. We're going to, as per usual, we're going to go through all the positions here. I mean, the goalkeepers, there's really no surprise there. So why don't we start up front? Wheels, I'll begin with you. The attackers who have been named to the squad. Hoylett is back from the last window there. You have Cavallini, who's in. Tajon Buchanan, he's kind of been in and out with some injury here, but take it away when it comes to the attackers.
Yeah, I mean, it's straightforward. I think it would be an absolute shock if Jonathan David and Kyle Larin don't lead the line. We kind of documented it in the build-up to this, to the build-up of naming this team. There was 3 options that Herdman had to choose from. It was Cavallini, it was Brim, it was Ugbo. And whether we see any of the other 2 players that weren't named at the Gold Cup, that remains to be seen, whether Larin and David will participate. So Cava gets back in. He's probably the most assured. He's probably playing, League One in France. Ugbo hasn't been playing a ton of football. Cavallini has been playing regular football. Herdman said it. He went for experience in this group, guys that are really good around the team as well, because it's just 2 games, Andy. Like, you probably don't have to go too deep into your team. Cavallini, a preferred option coming off the bench. You kind of know what to expect when he comes off the bench. So in the way that Herdman framed it, it's logical that Cavallini probably got the nod over the other 2.
Jordo?
Yeah, we were talking about Ugbo and Brim and Cavallini. Everyone else for me was a shoe-in, like Rio said. But I get it. 2 games. Cavallini knows the squad, grew up playing with these guys. You want him to come and contribute for whatever time it will be, whether that's the last 20 in a match. But you can kind of see already how this team's gonna shape and form. Wheels, we could probably come up with a starting 11 and might be off by 1 player. But we know what we're gonna expect, because this is a time to win hardware. This is not, let's see how we do against Panama. This is need to make it to the final and then take care of business in the final. This group is hungry. Any little message I give to one of these guys is saying this is the time. So you want this team to go out and prove it. I think with this squad they can.
Any concern when it comes to Alphonso Davies? As we know, he didn't finish off the season with Bayern because of injury. He has been training, but Wheels, he hasn't played in a match since April.
Yeah, him and Tajon Buchanan both are coming into camp and are coming in without any substantial actual competitive playing time for quite some time. So how ready will they be? That assessment will be made when they join up 4 days before the game starts. They join up over the course of the weekend, and we'll see. You have to play these guys. I mean, if he's fit enough to play, and by the sounds of it, both him and Buchanan are fit enough to play, but are they match fit? It seems very similar to the World Cup, where some of these guys weren't at their peak, at their optimal status. This is going to be the case this time around as well, which is frustrating. I don't think you can use it as an excuse, because this is a reality of professional sports, right? It's going to be very rare where everyone's going to be at 100. So it's just something that you're going to have to deal with. Jonathan Osorio, another name. We'll see if he plays this weekend for Toronto FC, but another player who's been out, and another player that you probably want to lean on a little bit. So there are some issues within this team.
Yeah, Oso's still recovering from that MCL strain. So let's take a look at that midfield, because I'm still very excited about this midfield. I think we were always, at least me, I was always a little worried. Atiba Hutchinson obviously getting older. Same with, Sam Piet. You're like, is he gonna, he doesn't have the legs under him either. And then hello, Stefan Eustachio. Hello, Ismail Kone. And now Victor Laturi, gets a call in as well. No Mark Anthony Kaye, someone who was part of the World Cup squad. So when we look at that midfield, what stands out to you, Wheels?
Well, it's Mark Anthony Kaye not being there first. He's been a fixture in this Canadian men's national team side, but I understand the move by Herdman, and it has to be a meritocracy at this point of the national team. You can't just show up when you're not playing your best football. And I just don't think anyone that's watched Mark Anthony Kaye can say he's been playing at his best level Perhaps he'll get back to it. Perhaps he'll be part of the Gold Cup squad. But for this tournament, I think it might be a little bit of an eye opener for Mac, and maybe something that he can build off of, use that as motivation and refocus his football, because so far this season, it's not the Mark Anthony Kaye that we saw in the past. The big blow from the midfield is no Aidan Morris being named to the team. And Herdman mentioned it, that his heart resides with the United States. I think it's, you don't really understand, or we won't really understand until Morris actually speaks, the true reasons behind it. And he's not cap tied to the United States until he accepts a call potentially to play in the Gold Cup and ends up playing for the United States in that competition. So there's still an open door. There's different things that motivate different players. Whether it's, he grew up playing in the United States system. He looks at himself as being American. This is completely different than the Tamori story or the Bunbury story or the Jonathan de Guzman story, where these guys grew up in Canada and then decided not to play for Canada. This is a case where you're trying to decide someone whose identity resides in another country to come join the Canadian ranks, which is always a much more difficult pull. The other thing, and Florian Balogun, the player who could have played for both England and the United States, every country in the world is going to go up against this, because the United States Soccer Federation signed a lucrative collective bargaining agreement with their men's and women's players, which pays these players a boatload of money. Like, Canada can't compete against that. England decided to turn away and say, Balogun, okay, go play for the United States. That's England that said it. So if you're competing and contending against the dollars that the United States are throwing at their players, like this whole era of wanting to represent your nation, and I'm going to donate, my fees to charity or whatever, that's going away quickly as more and more players are going to do what's best for them financially. I'm not saying that that's the case with Aidan Morris. Canada, of course, don't have a CBA right now, but all of these things factor into making a potentially life-changing decision. Jordan and I spoke about it in a segment. I think it's a mistake, because it's a competitive team to get into. There are no guarantees that Morris is going to be able to work his way into what is an exceptionally deep and young and talented U.S. midfield. It's a position of weakness for Canada. He could slot right in, and for me, start from day one for this Canadian team. So the pathway was there for him to be a key member on a nation and a country on the absolute rise. Right now, he just pulled the brakes on that. We'll see where it ends up.
Objectively, I understand. Even though we talked about it, Wheels. Subjectively, I'm like, I want to play. And obviously, I love Canada. So it's hard to look at. They're just different situations. Growing up in the States, and then you haven't played for Canada. If you're not connected to it, you're thinking, oh, yeah, I'll play, but maybe it's not a country that I grew up in, or I know much about, or I feel connected to. So I get it. Objectively, as a football, I'm thinking the best place for you to play and develop, you go and do that. But maybe it gets a bit murky waters when you talk about national teams, because even if you were to ask me if I was good enough and I had to make a choice between Canada or Jamaica or whatever, I wouldn't choose Jamaica. Like I'd say, nah, like I'm Canadian. I grew up here. This is where I went to school. This is what I love. So I get it. But I just think from a football standpoint, you would love to see him in red and white.
I will drop a couple of things here, Andy. Canada and John Herdman made a significant push to the player and his family. And I can confirm that there were people around Aidan Morris that wanted him to play for Canada. There's no doubt about that. Multiple Canadian players reached out and had conversations with Morris as well. This was a full court press, and we'll see where it ends up. It also is a little bit more murky, the fact that the U.S. has an interim manager right now, and
their second one.
Yeah, basically the leadership is all in flux and turning over as well. So it's probably hard for the player to determine where he actually sits on that depth chart. And if you're the United States, of course you want to keep a potential asset, which also keeps that asset away from a competitor in the region, a team that did better than you in World Cup qualifying. So there's got to be some gamesmanship going on here as well. Again, I still would love, still holding out hope. It's not over till it's over that Morris joins the Canadian ranks. But at this point, it's not looking promising.
Yeah. And you know what? Cool. That's fine. And that obviously is part of the story here. But I want to focus on guys who are representing Canada. And when you turn the page here, it seems like, Eustachio for sure, Jordan. And I feel like Ismail Kone, those are going to be the two guards in the middle of the pitch. So when you see those two guys and you just know they're age as well, their youth, Kone being still a baby, it just seems like for years to come, these two can be pretty strong in creating a partnership in that midfield.
Absolutely. And then with Kone, but I also think of Laturi as well. And I hope that Atiba can stay around just to shed some light and some wisdom with these young guys coming up, because you're looking at another decade of quality for the red and white in that midfield, and an area where it's not easy to get dynamic players nowadays. I think you're required to do a lot as a midfielder. You have to connect. You have to be a dog. We always talk about bully ball. You have to be able to get stuck in nowadays. You can't just be a guy that makes passes. You have to be able to play both ways and get box to box. And I think all the players that Canada have in the midfield are dynamic right now. So it's just beautiful to see.
Yeah, Eustache, you're doing great. Portugal as well. Was it 3 trophies this year? It's great. Head on over to our OneSoccer Instagram page. We have the trophies that all the Canadian men national team players have won with their pro teams, as well as the women. Canadians are doing a-okay. Wheels, as we look at the defenders, also defenders winning championships too. What do you make of that backline?
The core group is back. You're holding your breath a little bit on Derek Cornelius. He did his hamstring. Whether it's grade 1 or grade 2, we might know by the time that this broadcast airs. So that means another player will be called up into the squad. If it's a defender, it might be Hebert. We'll see. I think we got our predictions pretty spot on. Good to see Zator back into the team as well. It's just a group that I think will get a shot in the arm come the Gold Cup. With Zach McGraw coming into the team, I do think he has the ability to play a prominent role within this team. And with no Cornelius, it's a little bit more of Kamal Miller's job not to lose at this point. I think that he's in real competition with Cornelius for the left side of center back right now. Vittori in the middle, Johnston on the right. Take your pick, Cornelius or Miller. But if Cornelius isn't fit, then you expect Kamal Miller to get back to the spot that he played so well in at the World Cup.
I think Kamal's yeah, dare I say it, I think he's a shoo-in. I know Cornelius has been playing good football, but I think if I'm breaking down this team, Kamal, there's something that happens when he puts on that Canada jersey. He plays at a different pace. I'm excited to see Zator. I messaged him personally. I know this is a guy that this is what he wanted to represent the country, being around. This is what he talked about. Talk about 2 things: playing in Europe, which he's doing now, and it's perfect that he's playing in Poland, a place where he knows, and he comes from his lineage comes from there. And then now just playing for red and white, I think now he got a sniff of it, and he needs to get back to it, and he's itching to get back to it. And I messaged him, this is your time, and he said it is. He wants to go and take over. Now, you understand that there are players that will play ahead of you, but I think Zator has that mindset to come and train and to get established with John Herdman and what he likes to do and slowly work his way in. And you're not asking to go and play and start games, but you're asking to contribute to the squad. I think he can do that this window.
If he doesn't play in the Gold Cup, it's the windows in the fall, the September window, when you get some friendlies and new players. Like Herdman's going to have to use those games to test some of these new players. So Zator needs to show that in training that he is of the level. Like I know some of the other players that have been called up in recent years, they get out there and play with these Canadian players and they're levels, right? Like not everyone's on the same level as an Alphonso Davies. So it's an eye opener sometimes that some of these players might not be on that same level. So as long as he can keep that gap tight and continue to progress and make an impression, then he's going down the right path.
Let's talk about the women playing in this World Cup, jointly hosted by New Zealand and Australia. Bev Priestman announced the roster that she's going to be taking with her. So this is the pre-roster here for the World Cup. As the Olympic champions will now like to add some other hardware of the World Cup variety. And our own Oliver Platt had a chance to speak with Bev Priestman about this announcement, as she was in attendance at the Canadian Championship final yesterday. And we all feared for poor Bev that she, don't get eaten by the giant.
Really pleased to be joined now by Bev Priestman, who has named her preliminary roster for the 2023 World Cup in Australia and New Zealand. Bev, it's been a couple of years since you've been through this process of naming a squad for a major tournament. Does it get any easier to put these lists together?
No, I think this one, although there's more spots up for grabs, it was just as difficult and just as tough to have those honest conversations. But I think the pleasing thing for me is I remember some of those conversations for the Olympics, and players have completely change their path and where they're at. And I think that's the pleasing thing. You're having conversations with people that were right on the cusp or just missed out, that, in my mind and probably in their mind, it was a little bit more of a given. And I think that's credit to the players and the work they've put in.
Did you learn Did you learn anything about this process from the Olympics that you kind of took into this World Cup squad selection?
Yeah, I think, I probably simplified it. I think, we've had a lot of injuries and they've been talked about a lot, which has made this process, in many ways, we've been forced to trust some of the bodies that actually have made the squad, and that's been great because it gives you a reassurance going in, and new players to the system have had minutes and had pressure, and I think for heading into a World Cup, that makes a big difference. And so any player that can be called upon from any of this 25, although it'll go to 23, I'd absolutely have no doubt in my mind to put them on a football pitch.
Obviously, the injuries have been a big talking point. You've got players who have had time out over the past weeks or months. You have players who are also working their way back to full fitness now as well. How much of a headache is that kind of causing you going into this camp?
Yeah, listen, the grey area is not great. I think, you go into a preparation camp for a major tournament and you should be working on your identity, and in many ways some of the people who are coming back really define your identity. But at the end of the day, I think, I've settled on, in the conversations I've had with the players, whoever the 23 of the 25 are, we're good enough on our day. And I think we have to go in with that level of belief and confidence. You can't hide from the injuries, you can't hide where players are at, but at the end of the day, I'm comfortable and really, happy with this squad. As soon as I've named it, as soon as I've had the conversations, you feel ready and you just want to get to Australia and get this group moving. And, it'll be what it'll be. I think it's obvious the players that they're in a return to play status. Deanne has had some good minutes under her belt. She'll have to ramp up. But, you've got Desiree Scott and Nichelle Prince, who are very much at the current state are in a return to play process. And we'll see where they get to by July 8th.
Wanted to ask you about a couple of players in particular. Obviously, Christine Sinclair continues to be a huge part of this group. What kind of discussions have you had with her about her role, both in the tactical sense, you've moved her around a little bit, but also maybe starting versus coming off the bench, and how that changes at this stage of her career as well?
Yeah, I think I've had some really good conversations with Christine. I think what we're seeing is she's still delivering, right? She scored an absolute worldie at the weekend. And for this team, she's incredibly important. And I think, our conversations are often just about performance and tactical needs. I haven't defined or undefined a role for Christine. I think for me, this preparation camp is going to be about, seeing how everyone comes in, the new faces or the faces returning, how does that lineup look? But I'm really clear that Christine's got a massive part to play this summer, and I don't think we can hide from that and what she brings to this group. You need a goal. I think Christine's still delivering that. So.
Another player alongside her up front who always comes in for a lot of pressure and attention because of the way she's been touted as a prospect since the young age is Jordan Heitzma. She's playing fantastically well right now. Do you feel like this is maybe a major tournament that she's really ready for in her career?
Absolutely. I think you're dead right. She's on form. She's scoring. I think her identity of running in behind, that's what I've been pushing her to do. We've had some great meetings recently, and only 2 days ago to celebrate what she's really applied herself to. So you want players coming in on form, and I think Jordan's absolutely bringing that. So I think you're dead right. She's been brave. She's gone pro early, struggled for minutes, and has moved herself closer to home, and she's really thriving. So that's, as a head coach, that's exactly what you want going into a major tournament.
Going into Tokyo, maybe with some doubts from the outside looking in, you were very clear about what you wanted to achieve, which was changing that colour of the medal. Is it the same kind of clear targets this time in a World Cup with that bigger field of teams?
Yeah, listen, I think what I knew got us on the podium in Tokyo was belief, a clear mindset, and in many ways an underdog status. And I think we're in that space, right? You've got injuries, you've got big players like Janine missing. But I think I wouldn't like to play Canada on an underdog status, and I think we've got to go in with that mindset. I do know that a World Cup is incredibly difficult. You could look at any top 10 team and you could face one of them in the round of 16, and that's difficult. But at the end of the day, on our day, I believe in the players that I've got in front of me, and it'll just be when they cross that white line what it'll look like. But I've got every faith and every belief that this group can, on their day, go on podium at this World Cup.
Looking forward to it. Thank you, Bev.
Thank you.
Okay, Bev, we'll pay for that physio of having to look up the whole time. I forget how tall Ollie is until I have to stand next to him or you see Bev stand next to him. Anyway, she survived the interview. Some great stuff there. Worth noting, 25 players named to that roster who she's going to take with her. It needs to get down to 23. She plans on making the 23-player roster announcement on July 9th, the day before the FIFA deadline. The World Cup kicks off July 21st. Also worth noting, and this is what Bev did even before the Olympics. Behind closed doors, she's played games, and sometimes we can get some surprises there. Remember, we were all surprised, like Steph Labe ended up being the starting goalkeeper at the Olympics, where we thought Kaylin Sheridan was the shoe-in, but based on what she saw behind closed doors, she thought Labe was going in on a roll. And Bev was right. So I say this because on July 14th, Wheels, they are expected to have a game against fourth-ranked England behind closed doors. But, how important do you think that match is also going to be in assessing where the squad is before the World Cup? You are muted, my friend. You are muted.
Very
Anyway.
important. And while people have been, there's no send off game. Like, this game has been in the works for months. I can confirm that. Like, playing teams in Australia, halfway across the world against top sides like England to warm up are vastly superior than playing random country not going to the World Cup at home for a send-off game. Like, these games are invaluable. You said it, Andi. That was one considerable change. And I think that Stephanie Labe had something to do with Canada winning that gold medal in Japan. Just a little bit. As for the squad, no real surprises. I guess a couple of years ago, if you told me that Gabby Carl wasn't going to be part of the team, I'd say, no way. You got to be kidding me. But she's clearly fallen out of favor of Priestman and is not in the picture. Now it's just about health. I look at Prince and I look at Des Scott. Like, Des could have, if she's fit, I think she has a big role to play, even though she hasn't been playing. So it kind of makes you a little bit nervous. But the fitness of those two players, I think those are going to be real tests to see how fit they are. This isn't, just any other tournament. This is a World Cup. So you want your players to be at a certain standard. It's good that Rose has come back. She can certainly contribute. But I think the question mark and why it's 25 and not 23, it's revolving around those two players, Prince and Scott, right now. And you hope that both of them are fit and both of them prove to be fit. Then both of them will be part of the 23-player squad.
Being fit, but also, Wheels, just to add to that, getting them there, you need leaders. Looking at the squad that is so young and raw, that's great as well. But for me, as a player, I've always loved the balance. I think you need it. You need to look to someone on the pitch that has been there before, that's playing well, that's a bit older than you, to be like, yo, everything's cool. Don't worry about that. That's what you get in Des Scott. That's what you get in Prince. Like, if you're going forward as well, Prince is huge because you need players, wingers that can go and contribute and go and take on players and go and express themselves, but also just lead the charge. So we'll see how this team shapes up. But I think there's enough there to really make a run in this tournament.
Yeah. And at another point in time, we could probably have this conversation because I think it deserves, attention. And, Wheels, you brought it up because a lot of people, and I know even the players themselves have talked about not being able to have home games. And I think it's worth noting, right? The coach picks the games. And for Bev Priestman, like even back in that other window in April, she obviously felt that it was more important to play France in France, where the Olympics are happening in 2024. And Canada, by the way, has yet to qualify. They're going to try and do that in September. So you have to think in her head, she also wants them to be like, look at this place. Isn't this where you want to be in 2024? And then to your point, to be able to already get to Australia, crazy time change, get acclimated, play England there. Sure. And then, yes, we can then have the debate. Should Canada Soccer, though, be a little bit more pushy and saying it's still important to be home, be in front of the fans? Maybe it's incumbent on Canada Soccer to be better with their recruitment of the competition that they take on and getting them here. We can have that conversation for another day because I know that it's something that's been talked about, not just by the fans, but by the players themselves. But I just want to point out, because a lot of people wonder, like, how does this happen? The coach chooses the games and the location for what they feel is best for their team.